Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Let's Talk Tenkara podcast. If this ends up being a full episode or not, we will find out. It'll for sure be on the YouTube channel, if nothing else, and that is the Let's Talk Tenkara YouTube channel, not this guy's YouTube channel that is called the YouTube channel. But I am joined once again today by Justin Foss.
Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining, Justin. I had a request by a few listeners that were newer to Tenkara, didn't know what Tenkara was, and they really wanted to get a better understanding of some of the gear that's used, stuff that I take with me on a daily basis, or a not so daily basis, unfortunately. I wish it was more of a daily basis. But just the gear that I carry with me, and so that's really what this episode is going to be about. We're leaving that in there, by the way. Bloopers are always fun, right?
Bloopers are the best.
All right. So really, we're going to get started out with just the basics of what's in my bag. First of all, if I do carry a bag, it's either a little fanny pack like this, or I have a chest pack that I'll switch back and forth in between. Just depends on my mood. In that bag, nothing right now. It's all on the table. But the purpose of these types of bags, I like going small. I don't like carrying a bunch of extra weight with me when I'm going by myself. A lot of the time I actually go very minimalistic, and we'll get into a little bit more about what a minimalistic trip would look like here in a little bit as well. But that is the first thing that I highly recommend if you want to carry a little bit of gear with you, is make sure that you have a bag that you're comfortable with.
Cool. Yeah, plus these are stylish right now. So whether you're on the water or mall or date, you could wear this. I want to just change what's inside of it, probably.
I mean, everyone does it their own way, right? All right, the next thing, an essential tool, is a pair of nippers for cutting your line, whether it be cutting a new section of level line to whatever length you're using, changing flies. A good quality pair of nippers. When I say quality, I'm talking I buy like $2 or $3 pairs from Walmart, and that's what I run with. But very important for me is having that little needle on the end there. That's going to be to clean out the eye of your fly if it's got any resin from when it was tied or any gunk in it, so you're able to make sure that you're able to get that line through there.
What is the eye of a fly?
The eye is the little circle at the top that the thread goes, or the line goes through, that you tie your knot around to make sure it doesn't come off.
Perfect. Can you give another example of that real quick? Can you show that again?
Just for you, maybe later. All right, next, the lines that I carry, and actually one thing that I always carry that I don't have with me right now because it's in my chest pack, is a pair of forceps. If you're ever at the hospital and you get stitches or whatever, the little tweezers that they use, not tweezers, the pliers that they use that lock down on the thread, that's what we're using. You can pick them up at Walmart for $4. If you're in the unfortunate situation where you're at the hospital getting stitches, you ask for them afterwards, they will give them to you. They are one of the things that they do not reuse. So you can get them that way as well. They're a little bit more expensive that way. I don't recommend it, but then we get into line. So I've always got a spool of tippet. I recommend either Orvis or Scientific Angler. I'm always running a fluorocarbon. Nothing wrong with monofilament. I just prefer fluorocarbon. It's a little bit stronger, as well as it's going to blend into the water a little bit more. The reason I like Orvis and Scientific Angler, other than they're a little bit higher quality than, say, your Portland brand from Walmart, they have a line cutter built into them, which is phenomenal. So tippet, varying sizes, depending on what rod I'm using. That particular one's a 1X. I don't use it very often, but varying sizes, generally from 6 to 4X are what I carry, and then I do have some 1X for those occasions when I'm targeting bigger fish like brown trout or carp, things like that.
Is the 1X like, is that like the gauge size that goes up from 1 to 4?
Yeah, so the 1X, so they kind of vary based off of the weight that they're capable of holding. And so that 1X particular, I believe, is like 10.7 pound test. You can get some that are going to be varying a little bit more than that, but just that 1X is going to be like the strength of the line more than anything. All right, next, varying lines and things like that. I always carry just a spool of level line with me. If I'm going more minimalistic, I'll generally just have a couple line holders that I'll throw in my pocket. They're a little bit smaller than carrying around a full spool of level line, or in this case, this one has a PVC line on it. But I'll just throw in my pocket whatever line based off of what rods I'm going to be carrying with me that day. But there's both of those. As far as level line goes, this particular one's a 4.0. I always carry 3.5 and 4.0 are the two that I prefer. The reason being they feel the best to me. Then the exception being I do like a 2.5 level line for some of my smaller rods or my Japanese rods. It just gives them a little bit better flow, less weight on them.
This one doesn't quite blend into the water as much.
No, so your level line's not going to be in the water generally. The purpose of your level line is just to carry your tippet, really. It's going to be your main line. I like the yellow or a bright green because it's easy to see. You're able to see the pauses in the line when the fish strike. Generally speaking, you're actually going to try to keep that level line out of the water completely when you're out on the stream or the river and just have that clear tippet that blends into the water going through the water.
Okay.
Now, the next thing that we will talk about is rod choice. Rods vary depending on
genetics.
I mean, that's part of it in some situations. But varying rod lengths depending on where you're at. This particular rod that I'm getting out right here is the Baby Rodzilla made by Wasatch Tenkara Rods. It's a 6-4 action rod, fishable in 8, 9, and 10 feet. So 8 feet being your shortest length, 9 being your middle, and 10 being the longest. The rods are held in place to be able to fish at different lengths by this plug at the end. There is a little plug that has some O-rings on it, and that's going to lock the separate sections that aren't extending at the same time into place so they don't just go sliding out. Some Japanese rods, instead of using those O-rings, they'll do a little swell in the tips of the sections, and it makes it to where it just locks into the end a little bit better to where it's not going to go flying out unless you want it to. I do have a line holder on almost all of my rods as well, so I can keep them ready to fish. But rods just vary on application, where you're fishing, what you're fishing for, and things like that.
The end plug I'm used to.
Yeah, so those plugs, it is a nice design that they have you'll see the multiple O-rings on these Wasatch rods instead of a lot of rods will just have a single O-ring there, just to give an extra sense of security when it is locked in there. And that way as well, if one of those O-rings does break, there is a second one in there to hold things where they need to be. Then, like I said, varying rod lengths. Like I said, that one's 8, 9, and 10. I've got this one here. This is Darth Quattro, which is the world's first quadruple zoom. Zoom meaning it's fishable at 4 different lengths. Quadruple zoom. Zoom just means multiple lengths. But this rod here is fishable at 5'6", 6'6", 7'6", and 8'6". And so it's nice for those smaller waters. I have caught 16-inch rainbow on this rod, and it performed beautifully, which was amazing to me because this rod is made for small streams and small fish. But it's a great rod nonetheless.
A lot lighter.
Yeah, is in addition to being the world's first quadruple zoom, I believe it is the lightest rod on the market. Don't extend that one out first.
Go from the base.
Nope, not even that. We start at the tip of the rod. I'll show you here.
Okay.
So when we go to extend these rods out, we're gonna extend this part out here. This is called the Lillian. This is where our line's gonna tie on to, and we'll go over that here in a little bit. But we're gonna extend it out one section at a time. And you just snug it a little bit as you get to the end of each section, and that's going to lock it into place. Doesn't take a lot to hold it into place. You don't want it to be too stiff and locked into place when you go to put it away.
Cool how compact they are.
Yeah, and honestly, that was one of the things that drew me to it. Here, I'll take that baby Rodzilla from you so you can look at that one. That was one of the things that drew me to it. Is I like hiking, getting out away from people and into more remote areas, and they break down to these small lengths. I mean, this is an 8-foot rod I'm holding, and it's about 17 inches long when it's fully compact. You're able to just throw it in a backpack. I mean, you saw I had my backpack when I walked in here with the tube with this just chilling in it, not worried about it getting broke or anything like that. And it's just really easy to be able to throw it in and just go. I keep multiple rods in my car at all times, ready to go. It's just the convenience is what drew me to it.
Pretty intuitive too.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what's really nice about it is it doesn't take a lot to get into. You get into these smaller rods, or even the bigger rods, and they're just so easy to use, so simple to break out, put away. It's just simplicity, right?
I think the last time I fished, I went fishing. I was 8 years old, so like someone to be able to come in and grab a rod and be able to just like kind of intuitively figure out how it goes instead of having to deal with all the reel and line and stuff like that. You worked into a regular rod. Super.
Absolutely. And then the next thing, obviously, we got to get into flies a little bit here. I've got several different boxes here, and we won't go into every fly, but we will brush on some of the different types here. Primarily, you're going to get into your traditional Japanese style fly, your Sakasa Kabari. So that's going to be a very simple thread body fly with a reverse hackle. As I mentioned in the other episode you were on, that hackle reverse just means that the feathers are pointing towards the eye of the hook instead of down towards the body or the shank of the hook. They're very simplistic. They move nicely in the water. They can float on top a little bit. They can sink down. It just varies. I mean, you can get into some of these that are a little bit stiffer, hackled on them to where they float a little bit better, but it just varies on what you're looking for there. And then we can get into the use of some of your Western flies, and I'll just hand you the book on this one. Anything from Prince nymphs, woolly buggers, Paragon nymphs, zebra midges. There's really not a limit as to what you can use there. The flies are all designed, as you can see by looking at some of them, to imitate different bugs there. I will throw pictures of these fly boxes in the video as well so you guys can see kind of what we're talking about. But both that book and this one are going to have similar midge patterns and just wet flies as a whole. You've got some like little shrimp imitations there. These are called a mop fly. Rainbow warriors are really popular among a lot of people. The options are incredible on what you're able to throw. It's not just limited to those simple Japanese flies that people think of a lot of the time when they think Tenkara fishing.
A lot of how do you, when you're getting into it and like figuring out what kind of gear you want, how do you know which flies to go with and whatnot? There's quite a bit here, different types. They all look different, and I'm guessing serve different purposes.
Yeah, so they all imitate different things, right? There are some things in my box that don't imitate anything in particular. And what I generally do is whatever fly is on my rod, like Baby Rodzilla here has a Kabari fly and then a Royal Wolf, which is a dry fly on it as well, fishing a dry dropper. When I get to the water, a lot of times I'm just going to throw whatever's on that rod already if it's already set up. Otherwise, I'm just going to throw on whatever looks good to me and go from there. A lot of the times, the fish aren't as picky as people think they are. And if your presentation's right and you're at least semi close to something that's in the water at that time, they're going to go for it. If you do want to get more down to the science of it, I guess, and figure out, what fly is right for the application, you can go out and you can turn rocks over. You can look at what bugs are in the water. You can look and if you see fish like slurping at the top of the water, you can look to see what they're picking up off of the top of the water and make your fly selection based off of that. I mean, you can get into some of your dry fly selections there, grasshoppers, ants, little mayfly patterns, stimulators, caddies. Like the options are endless as far as what you can get into. But if you're looking at stuff like that, then that would be my suggestion. If you want to be specific to what's in this water, let's look and say, all right, what's under this rock? What can I find that is going to match whatever's in?
What's the dry?
So dry flies are going to be flies that you want to stay more on top of the water. They're going to imitate more of like your flying bugs, grasshoppers, beetles, things that are going to be terrestrials, right, that are up on the land that might fall in that pattern that you're holding. There's a cicada pattern. But you're looking at things that you want to keep dry. You can do different things like the foam body on those to keep them dry, or you can add a silicone gel to them, soak them in a silicone liquid, different tactics to make them float better, because most of those flies that don't have a huge foam body on them, if they get wet, they will, or get too wet, I should say, they will sink, and then they perform more like a wet fly. Your wet flies are going to be things that are in the water, egg hatchlings, stone flies before they fully turn into a fly, little nymphs. Mayflies are also, their larvae start out in the water and then they float up, and that's why you've got like those little mayfly fly patterns in there. So different things are going to fish a little bit different. One type of dry or wet fly is called an emerger, and what that fly does is it goes down, and instead of just sinking like most wet flies do, it'll float just under the surface a little ways, so it looks more like one of those eggs that's coming up with the bug hatching out of it, or one of those bugs that's trying to get to the surface so it can, be a bug and not a aquatic insect.
Alrighty.
But it's kind of cool to watch, actually, as you're out on the water and seeing different bugs hatching. You can also get into things like that. That's a streamer that's made to imitate more of like a bait fish swimming through the water.
What is like the price for most of these?
So flies really vary, and you can get into some really cheap, but as the old saying goes, you get what you pay for. You can buy really cheap flies, and they might work, they might break, they might bend, you don't know. You can buy a little bit higher quality flies. They might work, they might break, they might bend, you don't know. But generally, as you're buying the higher quality stuff, you're going to have more faith in it. Typically, if you go into most fly shops, Sportsman's Warehouse, Shields, you're able to find flies anywhere from about $1.20 up to over $10, $12, depending on what you're looking at and what type of fly there are. This fly here is a lot bigger than anything else you've looked at. This is still a very small fly. You can get double articulated flies, which means it's going to have a section in the middle that pivots and then a second hook on it. You can get into just massive flies that people are throwing to imitate big little bait fish and stuff. Big, little contradictory there, but bait fish that people are using to target bigger species, pike, musky, things like that, as well as some of your saltwater applications. But it just varies on what you're fishing for and what you need as far as what you're going to buy and what price point you're going to be at.
Okay. Something's been catching my eye over there, and I want to know what it is on the bottom of your net.
Yes, that is the next item to talk about. A good net. I personally will only use rubber nets. The reason being it's going to be nicer on the fish, but the biggest reason for me, other than taking care of our wildlife, is if you've ever had to dig a hook out of a mesh net, it is not a pleasant experience, and you should learn from other people's experiences. Don't waste your time. Get a rubber net. I picked this one up at Walmart for about $20. It's been great. This is going on its 6th season. Never had a problem with it. It's still holding up really good. And then part that you're talking about here, this is a lanyard that I clip onto my back. It can hook on to the back of a chest pack. I can hook it onto the side of my fanny pack there. And it's a retractable lanyard, makes it to where I can grab the net, use it, let go of it, and I'm not worried about my net floating down the stream. It's going to go right back where I left it. I know a lot of people, when they use lanyards, their big hesitation is getting it snagged on branches and stuff and jolting themselves back or breaking it. The nice thing with this one is you can lock it in place to where if you're moving around through a lot of brushes and stuff, it's not going to get dragged behind you. The downside is remember to unlock it before you start to fish. Learn from my experience there. It's not fun. There. It's not fun trying to fight a fish and unlock your net at the same time.
That's pretty light too.
Yeah. A lot of these nets are going to be made out of like a bamboo or a pine, something very lightweight as far as the wood goes, but durable. And then the lanyard itself, you're not really going to feel the weight of because you're not toting it around in your hand or anything. It's going to be on your belt or on your back where it's not going to be an inconvenience to you.
How does this work for butterflies?
I'd assume it would work okay. The downside to it for butterflies would be the heaviness of the rubber net might crush the butterfly a little bit and possibly damage its wings.
I know you have that trip planned, so when you're done butterfly catching, just let me know how it worked out.
You know, my son would love to try that, and I think for that would be the one time I would say use a mesh net.
You heard it here, folks.
Mesh net for butterflies. All right, perfect. Really quick, we're going to dive into setting up a rod. Okay. So if you would hand me the level line, these knots that I'm going to use, I'll go over them really quick here, but you can find them on my YouTube channel as well. I'm not going to measure these out to full length for the sake of, can you hand me the nippers as well? For the sake of brevity and trying to keep this short and not having 8 feet of line or less or however much drug all over the place. But this first knot that I'm using to tie to my Lillian, it's called the pincer knot. Pincer knot, that one. And I tie it a little bit different than most people. There's the traditional way, you put a bend in it, you wrap it around the main line, tuck your tail through and tie it. That way works, takes a lot of time, versus I'm going to put my finger through the bend, I'm going to wrap my finger down around, twice wrapped around, pull the tail through, and I've got it.
I think the real test is if you can do that.
Like you said, the video for that is on my Instagram. And I will show you again here. That way you can follow. You're right-handed, I'm left-handed, so mirror what I do here. Okay. Maybe if I can not drop the line down around. Grab your tail. Go back the way you came, so down. And then up over the top. Shove your thumb through that hole that your index finger's in. Grab your tail. Yep. and pull it through. Yep, just pull it all the way through, and that slides right down. And the cool thing with this one, when you're done with it, because a lot of people that don't, well, I guess not even a lot of people, some people that don't store their lines on their rod, they like to be able to remove the knots that they're using here. And the cool thing is, when it's tied right, it does just pull right out.
Okay, I did it wrong.
Nope, that is how it's supposed to be tied. But anyway, so we're going to tie that knot. On top of, or on the end of that, I like to throw a little overhand knot. And that way, when I go to remove this off of my Lillian later, it's just got a point that I can pull on with my fingernails. Gives me a little bit easier point to grab onto. I leave all of my tag ends with at least an eighth of an inch of tag line on it, just so they don't come untied. We're going to take that loop that we just tied with the pincer knot, and we're going to throw that knot around our Lillian. Because that is a slip knot, when a fish pulls on it, it's just going to get tighter. It's not going to be a worry about if it's going to come off or not. From there, go ahead and hand me the tippet, the Orbis one. All right. We'll get out a little piece of tippet here. I'll hand you that one. I'll get another little piece here. And we're going to tie a double surgeon's knot. And so what we're going to do here, we're going to line up our lines next to each other. And we're going to loop them around like you're doing an overhand knot. Then you're going to take the tail from both the tail end of your level line and the main line of your tippet, and you're going to go through that hole twice. And that's what makes it the double surgeons. And I tied my loop a little bit too small, so I got to go the long way around here. But then you just cinch it down tight. You should end up with something that looks like that. Perfect. So double surgeon's knot. I will throw a link to that knot into the description as well. And then we get back down. Like I said, I leave all of my tag ends with at least an eighth of an inch tied to them. The exception being this level line here. I'm going to cut that off at closer to 3/8 to a half an inch. And the reason for that is when I'm watching the water, that gives me just an extra little piece that I can see, a little cider, if you will, so I can watch the motion of the end of that line. And then for the last knot, when I tie on my flies, there's two different knots you can use. And you know what, for the simplicity of having something big and easy to see. Two different knots. The first one is going to be a more traditional knot that a lot of people are going to be familiar with. And that's going to be, you put your fly through, you take that tag end. I'm trying to tie this backwards from where I normally do, so it's going to be harder. There we go. Take that tag end, you're going to wrap it around your main line 4 to 7 times. We're going to go through that loop there. Half a twist up with your fly, down, back around, and back through that loop, and cinch that down tight. But recently, the reason I say I do two different flies, or two different knots there, recently I was shown that same knot that I tie for the Lillian works fantastic for tying on flies. And so for that, we're going to go and we're going to put that hook just in the little nook by our pinky, down around, 1, 2, thumb through, grab the tail, and cinch it all down. So that is basically how we're setting up our rods from start to finish. And then if you are doing your own custom level line, you're going to attach your level line to the end of the rod, extend your rod all the way out, measure the line length that you want and cut it at that length, and then attach your tippet at that point. Any questions from the peanut gallery?
None from the peanut gallery.
All right, perfect. Well, that pretty much covers everything that I carry in my personal bag when I go out to the river or the pond, wherever. I guess the only other addition, something we talked about in the first episode, see if you know what it's called.
Not a bob.
Not a bobber.
Not a buoy.
Nope, not a buoy.
But it does act as one.
Yes, it's a bobber.
Oh, it's a bobber?
Well, it acts as a bobber.
Oh, okay.
It is a strike indicator. Some people use them, some people hate them. If I'm fishing still water without a dry fly on, if I'm just fishing nymphs in still water, more than likely I'm going to throw an indicator. If I'm fishing a dry dropper, which is dry fly with a wet fly underneath it, that's going to be my dry fly is going to act as my indicator there. But a lot of the situations that you'll see me fishing in on streams and rivers, I'm not going to use one of these, with the exception of if I'm on a river and it's got very high currents to the point where I'm having a hard time telling what is the current moving my line or what could be a bite. I will throw an indicator on, because that's going to be a for sure sign of what is what. The way that works, you pull this toothpick out, shove your line through, shove the toothpick back in, and it holds it in place. All right. Outside of that, any further questions?
It's pretty simple.
Yeah. We still need to get out on the water and show you how to do it.
Maybe that'll be another video.
Maybe.
Be the parody video.
Well, what we'll have to do is we'll have to have you back on the show afterwards so you can talk about your experience with it. How about that?
There we go. Let's do it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning into this short episode of the Let's Talk Tenkara podcast. Thank you, Justin, again for joining us. And let us know if you have any questions. We are still looking for people to fill the interview spots for our 50 States of Tenkara series. We've got 5 states down so far. We just filmed the Colorado episode a couple days ago. That'll may or may not be live at the same time as this one or before this one. We'll find out. Trying to get ahead a little bit, but again, reach out if you'd like to be featured, or you know someone that would be great to have on the show. We're always open to suggestions. You can reach me on Instagram at Let's Talk Tenkara, or you can shoot me an email at letstalktenkara@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.